The Vietnam War was supposed to be a limited mission. American leaders believed they could stop the spread of communism, protect South Vietnam, and prevent another nation from falling under Soviet influence. Instead, the United States became trapped in a conflict that lasted nearly 20 years. More than 58,000 Americans would lose their lives. Millions of Vietnamese civilians and soldiers would be killed. Despite overwhelming military power, advanced technology, and billions of dollars in resources, victory remained out of reach. How did the world's strongest military become stuck in a war it couldn't win? The answer lies in Cold War fears, political decisions, guerrilla warfare, and a conflict that neither side fully understood. This is the story of how America got trapped in Vietnam. After World War II, the French tried to reclaim their colony in Indochina, but Vietnamese communist leader Ho Chi Minh wanted independence. The French lost a brutal war at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The Geneva Accords temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel. One line on a map split Vietnam in two, and set America on a path toward disaster. North under Ho Chi Minh, south under a Western-backed government. Elections were supposed to reunite the country in 1956, but the U.S. feared Ho Chi Minh would win, so America backed a new leader in the south, Ngo Dinh Diem. Diem was corrupt, repressive, and deeply unpopular. He canceled the elections. He persecuted Buddhists. He lost the support of his own people. A communist insurgency, the Viet Cong, began attacking Diem's government. The US saw this as part of a global communist conspiracy, the domino theory. If Vietnam fell, they said, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and all of Southeast Asia would follow. So President Kennedy sent more military advisors. By 1963, there were 16,000 Americans in Vietnam, not fighting, advising. But Diem's regime was crumbling. He was assassinated in a CIA-backed coup. Then came the moment that changed everything. August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin, U.S. destroyer Maddox was on a secret intelligence mission near North Vietnamese waters. North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked. One hit. 2 days later, the Maddox and another destroyer reported a second attack, but later evidence showed that second attack may never have happened. Intercepted communications suggested it was radar ghosts and jittery crews. But President Johnson went to Congress anyway. He asked for a resolution giving him broad authority to take all necessary measures. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution almost unanimously. Only 2 senators voted no. It was not a declaration of war. It was a blank check. Johnson used that blank check to begin bombing North Vietnam and to send the first American combat troops. In early 1965, Marines waited ashore at Da Nang. Private First Class James Anderson lands at Da Nang Air Base. He's 19 years old. He expects a short mission, a few months, then home. Instead, he steps into 120-degree heat, dense jungle, and the sound of distant mortar fire. He will survive Vietnam, but 58,000 of his fellow soldiers won't. Anderson's war lasted 3 years. America's lasted 20. The U.S. military believed it could win through firepower and attrition, kill more enemy soldiers than they could replace, break their will to fight. General William Westmoreland called it the crossover point, but North Vietnam and the Viet Cong did not fight like a conventional army. They had no cities to defend, no factories to bomb, no supply lines that couldn't be rerouted through jungles and tunnels. They moved at night. They blended into the population. They struck and vanished. The U.S. ran search and destroy missions. Helicopters dropped soldiers into hot zones. They searched for enemy forces, then returned to base. But the enemy rarely stood and fought. The body count became the metric of progress. But whose bodies were counted? Soldiers, civilians, anyone. The American people were told the war was being won. But every night on television, they saw flag-draped coffins and body bags. By 1967, nearly 500,000 American troops were in Vietnam. The war was costing $2 billion a month, and there was no end in sight. January 30, 1968, Tet, the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, a traditional ceasefire, but this time, there was no ceasefire. Nearly 85,000 communist troops attacked over 100 cities and military bases across South Vietnam. Even the U.S. Embassy in Saigon was briefly occupied. The Tet Offensive was a military disaster for the North. They lost more than 40,000 soldiers, but it was a psychological victory, because for years, the American people had been told the enemy was weak and losing. Now they saw the enemy could strike anywhere, anytime. Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, went to Vietnam and returned saying the war was unwinnable. President Johnson watched his broadcast. and reportedly said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." Johnson announced he would not run for re-election. The war at home was lost. President Nixon took office in 1969 with a plan, Vietnamization, gradually withdraw American troops and transfer combat responsibility to the South Vietnamese Army. He also secretly bombed communist supply lines in neighboring Cambodia and Laos. The war continued. Protests at home grew larger. In 1970, National Guardsmen killed 4 student protesters at Kent State University. By 1972, U.S. troop levels dropped below 50,000. In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. The U.S. withdrew all remaining troops, but the ceasefire did not last. In 1975, North Vietnam launched a final invasion. The South Vietnamese army collapsed. On April 30, 1975, Saigon fell. The last Americans were evacuated by helicopter from the embassy roof. The war was over. More than 1.3 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers died, up to 2 million Vietnamese civilians, and 58,220 Americans. The war cost over $200 billion, but its deepest wound was trust. The Vietnam War shattered America's confidence in its leaders. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial stands in Washington, D.C., a black wall of names, reflecting every visitor who stands before it. That is the legacy of Vietnam. Not victory, not defeat, but a warning. If you want to understand how the Cold War shaped America's longest and most painful conflict, hit subscribe. I cover the untold stories of the Cold War every week. Watch my Cuban Missile Crisis video next. This is the Gridded War. See you in the next one.